What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Wildcast podcast. I am Justin Spears, your host, here with Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star, talking about Arizona's latest loss to the West Virginia Mountaineers, losing 31-26 over the weekend. Some good that we saw in that game on Saturday, but ultimately the Wildcats were unable to get it done. So we're going to rehash everything that took place on Saturday at Arizona Stadium, and also kind of look ahead to UCF because the Knights are making some changes there. We'll get into that here in just a little bit, but just want to remind all of you guys that we have some great work on Tucson.com. Check out all of the Arizona football coverage. Also, Arizona basketball season is getting rolling, so it's a very exciting time of year. Find all coverage of Southern Arizona sports at Tucson.com and also the Wildcaster mobile app. And as always, you can find the Wildcast podcast on Apple and Spotify, and the video version is available on Tucson.com. And then also later on in the podcast, Lev has a bunch of mailbag questions that we're going to dive into. So, Lev, Arizona losing 31-26. We thought that going into the Rich Rod Bowl, that if Arizona could pull out this win, everyone can kind of take a big, deep breath, sigh of relief almost, and be like, okay, 500, let's figure out a way to get the season back on track, maybe run the tables if possible, and you could still have a very memorable season, right? But Arizona, they dig themselves a hole against West Virginia, and they're trailing the entire game. They're playing catch up. The offense struggled early on, and then they kind of a spark in the second half, especially in that fourth quarter. Their final three drives all resulted in touchdowns, which has not happened since the New Mexico game. They haven't had three consecutive drives result in touchdowns since the season opener. And then also the defense, too. I thought, despite the injuries, and I know we give them the benefit of the doubt, but that side of the ball has been playing well despite all the injuries. And I thought against West Virginia, that side was just not good. I thought special teams also had some blunders too. It wasn't a complete game, and in the end, it was too little too late, and Arizona loses to West Virginia 31-26. Overall impressions of what happened on Saturday, Liv?
Yeah, I mean, here's my question, I guess, moving forward. Like what we saw at the end of the game, is that fool's gold or is that a sign that they figured some things out? Because a lot of the good offense that we saw was kind of unstructured, improv, but maybe they can take something out of that and be like, you know what, maybe we need to run a little bit more no huddle and just like try to open the game up a little bit. You put the other team on its heels instead of Arizona's offense kind of constantly feeling that way. That's my biggest question on that side of the ball. Defense is going to be, he's going to try to Dwayne Akeen is going to try to MacGyver this thing the rest of the way without some key parts, really important parts. Hopefully, they'll be able to get at least one of their defensive tackles back for this upcoming game. I don't know how you can go into the UCF game playing what's essentially a dime defense. Like I classified Dalton Johnson as a linebacker for this last game. When I did my grades, I put him in with the defensive front. Like if you look at PFF snaps by position, they said he was a linebacker in this game. And the idea behind that, if you're Dwayne Akina, is my best 11 guys are going to be on the field. Okay. And in his mind, that includes Jack Luttrell, includes Owen Goss. UCF is just going to run the ball. I mean, that is what they do. That is what they're best at. It's a power running game. I don't know how you can go in there with a light box. So that's my concern on defense. And then finally on special teams, man, can you make the argument that that unit has been a net negative this season, despite having maybe the best kicker in the country? I think maybe you can,
Sure.
because if you look at the fake field goal, that 2-point play against Texas Tech, where they were totally, caught off guard, and then the punt return against Kansas State that completely flipped that game around. So those are my thoughts on all three phases.
And they almost had a penalty on special teams too. Justin Holloway, the long snapper, who went down the field and ran into the kick returner for West Virginia. But the referees were kind enough to pull up the flag. But I looked at that play like, oh my gosh, come on, man! Like, what are you doing here? So, Yeah, it's special teams. I agree, Lev. I think it has been a net negative for the Wildcats this season. I do think that the offense was really playing some backyard ball there, especially towards the second half. We saw T Mac throw a couple of passes. One of them was to a wide open Noah Fafita, who could have walked in the end zone had he not bobbled the catch. And I think it was nice to see those two guys kind of have that moment, where we haven't really seen them really click on all cylinders in a while. T Mac scored his first touchdown since the season opener. He had over 200 yards receiving, I think, for the first time since the season opener. First time with over 100 yards since the Texas Tech game. But then again, Arizona's offense struggled in the early goings, and that fumble by Quali Conley is what Brent Brennan called the momentum killer. And you brought up this stat or this phrase that's been popularized over the last couple of years under the previous coaching regime. You brought up the middle eight, and I'm like, you know what? The middle eight has been a problem for Arizona in this losing streak. So I went into every single game and looked at all the drives and looked at the middle eight. And what is the middle eight? It is the last 4 minutes of the second quarter, also the first 4 minutes of the third quarter. And Jed Fish and his staff, they emphasized how much Arizona needs to win the middle eight battle. And in Arizona's 3-1 start, remember, this also includes getting blasted by Kansas State in Manhattan. In the middle eight, Arizona outscored its opponents 34-0. In this 4-game losing streak, they have been getting outscored 34-0. So it has completely flipped. The middle eight for Arizona has completely flipped, and it has resulted in Arizona not being able to win. And they love to kick the ball to start the game because they want to start the second half on offense. Well, it feels like every single time Arizona starts the second half, it's 3-and-out, and they punt it away, and Arizona is just not winning that middle eight.
And not only that, but they started that second half drive at the 12-yard line because the blocking was so bad on the kickoff return. So, you're hoping for we get the ball. We're only down 10, maybe start at the 30, the 35. No, you're back at the 12. And then they had a good play on first down. I think they gained 6 yards and then an incomplete pass, or maybe it was a sack. It was a sack. And you're third and long. What I would do if I were Brent Brennan this week or Sunday, which we're recording this on Monday, so this has already happened, but I would take the play after Noah Fafita dropped the would-be touchdown pass, where Noah Fafita ran into the end zone. He ran over 3 West Virginia defenders. I would show that tape to my team over and over again. Say, if you guys play like this, we're going to win. Look at the determination this kid is showing. Look at the courage. Look
You want
at the
them to
toughness.
go full Rudy, yelling at Vince Vaughn
Hey
in practice?
man, sure. He's listed at what, 5'10"? He's
Yeah.
not. He's probably 5'8", 170 pounds. Okay, maybe he's a little heavier than that. He's most every player on the field, besides maybe the kickers, are bigger than Noah Fafita is. And he was not going to be stopped. He was going to score that ball no matter how many defenders he had to go through. That would be my teaching tape for the guys this week. If we can all do this, we've got a chance. And when you're undermanned, when you're sort of trying to figure things out on offense, I mean, one of the things you can control is your effort, right? And I don't think that their effort has been waning, but you could always give a little bit more. And he really gave a lot on that play. And I think that was another, one of the positives you could take from that second half.
Speaking of offense, Lev, I rewatched the game on Sunday, and oh my gosh, who was on the broadcast? The FS1
It was
broadcasters.
Alex Faust and Robert Smith.
I think it was Robert Smith who was kind of criticizing the play calling. And it was really interesting to hear. And I think the Fox broadcasters the week before were kind of criticizing
questioning the route combos and
the fact that the broadcasters week after week are sitting there scratching their head wondering, man, these routes are a little questionable. Where are the underneath routes? Where are those kind of plays at? And I think that's what West Virginia did that was just so much better than Arizona. I mean, they ran a lot of like jet sweeps and stuff like that. They always had good angles on their runs, but they did a lot of things that just made Arizona's defense look really silly. And I think Nico Marchiol did a really good job of being patient. There were a lot of times where he would scramble and really bait a few defenders in, and then he would just quickly dump it off to the tight end. Again, it's not plays that are considered splash plays, but I mean, gets you positive yards. It keeps you on schedule. And so many times we've seen Arizona in these routes and how they're running plays. It just seems so long. And then they get into these third and long situations. And then they're forced to have these deep balls. And then they get off the field so quick. Um, but yeah, I do find it interesting how much broadcasters have been questioning Arizona's play calling, and some of it has to do with play calling. I also think some of it too is on Noah Fafita. There were multiple times where a guy like Sam Olsen or Roberto Miranda were completely wide open in the flat, but he's throwing the deep ball to his longtime buddy in T Mac. So Noah Fafita, while I think the coaching staff has failed him in some degree, I also think that he is totally he's got to be responsible for some of the issues that's going on offense. But what's great about Noah Fafita is that he continues to fall on the sword and take accountability and take the blame every step of the way.
There were some plays where it seemed like he could have gone to an underneath option. One of them in particular was like a rollout to the right side. And we could see it from where our vantage point. Roberto Miranda was open underneath and he threw downfield to T-Mac and the ball got knocked away. There are some occasions where the running back released into the flat and he didn't go that way. It's always to the sidelines though. There seems like there's hardly ever that release valve over the middle, which you see a lot in the NFL. The check down is over the middle. I don't know if that's by design, if that's because of Noah Fafita's height. West Virginia, I thought, did a great job of, designing an offense that fit their quarterback well. Like there was a lot of plays that were rollouts to the left because he's a left-hander. A lot of kind of easy dump off passes. They also, I thought this was interesting. They did not throw the ball at Tacario Davis one single time in this game. 0 targets. So kudos to Tacario for shutting down one side of the field, but also smart for West Virginia to not go after, Arizona's best cornerback, right?
Yeah.
One of only 2 starters remaining from the beginning of the season with what that unit looked like. So yeah, I thought, look, I pointed this out. I thought the offense did some different things that were good. There was more motion overall. T-Mac was moving around the formation all over the place. They also used tight ends and running backs to chip block if necessary, which they hadn't been doing. So they're trying, to be sure. But then you look at Noah's average time to throw, and again, it's over 3 seconds. I think it was 3.37. And that number is one that I keep bringing up because it's indicative of how long he's holding the ball, how slow these plays are to develop. And when you contrast it to last year, I mean, it's startling. There was not a single game last year where he was over 3 seconds, not one. And this year, all but one, he's been over 3 seconds. So I think I described it as a slight step forward for the offense. I think it was, but it doesn't suggest that all of their problems are solved.
Yeah.
There's still a long way to go.
And I think the defense, while we talked about them dealing with the injuries and just bending but not breaking, I thought that unit took a pretty big step back just because of the runs allowed. Like I think stopping the run has been something that they've been pretty decent at since the New Mexico game. I think the last time they gave up over 200 yards on the ground was against Kansas State, and they gave up 203 against West Virginia. And also just staying disciplined. I understand that West Virginia, they changed up their cadence, but you also can't jump offside 3 times. 3 times in a single game. To me, that just shows a defense that's just not disciplined. And that side of the ball, to me, did not show up. It was also the first time They hadn't recorded a takeaway in like 4 or 5 games. So the defense took a step back. Offense, man, I need to see more of it against UCF. I'm with you, Lev, when you question, is it a baby step forward or is it fool's gold? Because a lot of the plays that were made there towards the end, it was no Fafita and T Mac just being brilliant and playing backyard ball and using their connection to make some of those plays. So, but at the end of the day, Lev, this team has lost 4 straight games. And, it seemed, not long ago, we were like, okay, maybe Arizona can have this magical season going on the road, beating a top 10 Utah team in Salt Lake City. Like, that was a gutty win. And it still is, right? But then, yeah, at that point, I'm like, is this going to be a season defining win? Because there are still a lot of games left on the schedule. And now they sit 3-5. They got 4 games remaining. UCF's a very tough team. I know that they've been struggling and they've lost 5 straight, but that's still a really tough team. ASU is much better than we all thought. Houston, we don't know what Houston team is going to show up, and then you got to go on the road and play against TCU. You got 4 games left on your schedule, and you got to win 3 to get to a bowl game, and 2 of them are road games. How are you feeling right now about Arizona and the rest of the way?
Yeah.
Because right now it looks like they're not going to a bowl game.
Yeah, not great. I said at the time that, the Utah win wouldn't mean anything if they lost the follow-up game against Texas Tech. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, that was a game that they should have won. They were kind of, controlling the action to a great extent. That was the game where they kept settling for field goals over and over and over again and ended up losing. They had a chance at the end and, best player fumbles. It happens. And then, looking at this game, I was like, they almost have to win this game. I labeled it a must win because the path to a bowl game is so much easier if you're 4-4 with those 4 games remaining, 2 on the road, 2 at home, versus where they're at now. Like they have to steal at least 1 road game and hold serve at home. And I'm not sure they can do that given how inconsistent their offense has been, how banged up their defense is. Like you said, ASU is better than we all thought going into the season. I mean, I think if you put the point spread out for that game right now, I'd probably favor ASU by a touchdown or so, even though the game is here, right? And the Houston game looks like one that they can win on paper, but that's going to be a dead atmosphere that night. Is an 8:15 Friday game. Basketball is playing at Wisconsin like around the same time. I don't know, if they lose against UCF and then go on a bye week, I mean, there's going to be no buzz about football going into that Friday game. So
Yep.
they're not going to have this huge home field advantage that you'd like to have in that situation. So no, I'm not feeling great at all about their chances. I have a weird feeling about this upcoming game that maybe they could steal one against a UCF team that is not only struggling but kind of maybe panicking a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. But even if they did that, it's still an uphill climb.
Yep. Well, like you mentioned, UCF, they're panicking right now. They just fired their defensive coordinator, Ted Roof, after not even a full season. He was hired back in January. And during UCF's 5-game losing stretch, they've been giving up over 30 points per game. So I think, is it Addison Williams? Is that who's taken over as the interim DC? He's the co-defensive coordinator, also associate head coach. And they're also putting play calling duties on offense to Tim Harris. So they're changing up their coaching philosophies, how they approach this week. They got rid of their defensive coordinator. I mean, we've seen Arizona make some changes on its staff this year, just in terms of what they're able to do. We saw play calling duties go from Dino Babers, the offensive coordinator, to passing game coordinator Matt Atkins, but it's not like the play calling has been significantly better. We have seen a little bit more, pre-snap stuff, guys getting emotion. I thought how they used T-Mac in this last week, I thought was much better. Like, I understand that guys are, teams are bracketing T-Mac. They're putting double coverage on him, but you have to figure out a way to get the ball into your best player's hands. And he's really good at yards after catch. If you just put the ball in his hands and watch him maneuver through traffic, like good things happen with T-Mac. But yeah, UCF, they're making changes with their staff. They just fired their defensive coordinator. They got a new offensive play caller. And then, oh, hey, it's the space game, which they're 7-0, and their average margin of victory in the space game is 28.9 points. Boy, it doesn't bode well for the Arizona Wildcats. I'll tell you that.
Ted Roof was the defensive coordinator and linebacker coach for Oklahoma before UCF. So he was on staff for the Alamo Bowl
That's right.
last year, which, honestly, like Arizona, it was a weird game. I mean, Arizona was super explosive at the beginning and kind of toward the end and had a big lull in the middle, offensive line issues, which foreshadowed offensive line issues that they've had ever since.
Yeah.
So just a little fun fact about Ted Roof, who's no longer the DC at UCF. I think last note on the game, Justin, from this last week is they shuffled the offensive line like significantly. They
Yeah.
moved Wendell Moy went from one side to the other. Alex Deuce went from one side to the other. Jonas Avanaya went from one side to the other. Michael Wooten started at right tackle. The only person who was in the same spot that they're usually in was Josh Baker, the center. And I thought they did okay, under the circumstances. Like, not amazing, but I didn't feel like, Noah was under duress the entire game. Like, that's how it felt against Colorado. They had 7 sacks allowed against Colorado, and it was 2. And I think the pressure rate fell from like 47.8% to like 32% or so, which is manageable. You'd like that number to be more like 20%, ideally, that pressure allowed stat. But good, better, I should say, not good, better. And then, okay, now let's stick with this, right? Get these guys working together another week in these same spots and see if they take another step in a situation where now you're going to have crowd noise. Right. I mean, no matter what UCF's done in the last 5 weeks, that place it's a smaller stadium. They're very enthusiastic and they're going to be jacked up for the space game. So the offensive line's got a difficult assignment this upcoming week in terms of, avoiding those false starts, those killer penalties. I mean, how many times did Arizona go offside
3.
against West Virginia? And those plays are killers. That turns a 3rd and 8 into a 3rd and 3. If it happens to you on offense, you go from 1st and 10 to 1st and 15. And the way they are right now, you can't have that.
All right, Lev. Let's get into the mailbag. You got lots of questions submitted. I didn't even have to put out the bat signal. You got a bunch. Let's get right to it.
Okay. All right. This one's big picture. It is from Diego Carrillo III. In your humble opinion, sir, how did this season end up this way? A lot of talent. I get it. New coaching staff. Injuries suck. And I know the kids are playing their hearts out. But where did it all go wrong? Man, that is, we could do a whole podcast on this. I think it starts with a couple things. One, the timing of it all was challenging for this coaching staff. You're taking over in mid-January as opposed to most of the coaching changes in the country, which were, early December. You have way more players to choose from in the transfer portal. So they're scrambling big time to fill a lot of holes. They lost almost an entire recruiting class and had to fill those spots. They did the best they could in that regard. And then I think the other the biggest issue on the team has been the offense. And the way that Brent Brennan decided to, kind of patch together this offensive staff, it just didn't work. He made a hire in Dino Babers, someone that was a mentor to him, someone that he worked under way back in the day at Arizona, and tried to kind of cobble together this offense, and it really didn't work out. I think if the offense was better, the whole narrative about the season and the conversations we'd be having would be different. It's been, borderline disaster. And that's been the thing that people can point to when it comes to Brennan. Like, what did you do to these guys? These super talented offensive players, the face of the program, Noah Fafita, Tedero McMillan. Like, why aren't we better on offense?
It all went wrong on January 10th. That is the exact date when everything went wrong because, Lev, you know what happened on January 10th? Nick Saban retired.
The first domino. Yep.
That was the first domino. And our colleague, John Wilner, actually wrote about this in his latest hotline. Nick
He
Saban.
stole my idea, by the way, but go
Oh, did he?
I'm kidding. I was gonna kind of write something to that effect, but it's okay.
But yeah, Nick Saban, the greatest college football head coach of all time, retired on January 10th, and that was the first domino that fell. And then Bama decides to hire Kalen DeBoer after he led Washington to an appearance in the national championship game. And then Washington, they were looking for their next guy. And, we heard some other names get in the mix. And then next thing you know, Jed Fish is right there. He's interviewing and then he takes the job just a couple of days later. And then a couple of days after that, that's when Arizona decided to hire Brent Brennan. And, we expected some players to go to Arizona. Heck, we actually expected like a whole boatload of players to leave Arizona and go to Washington. I think the fact that only just a few of them, they are impactful players like Jonah Coleman, that's a pretty significant loss, right? Ephesians Prysock, a really good cornerback. I mean, a guy that's going to be playing in the NFL, in my opinion. I think that was a big loss. And then a bunch of recruits, right? Guys from the portal, some really good high school football players, including some guys that are in state. And so Jed took those guys over there, but Arizona kept the core. They kept Noah Fafita, Tetairoa McMillan, 4 out of the 5 players in the secondary, including Takaria Davis, who's going to be an NFL draft pick. The guy right there in the middle, right? Jacob Manu at linebacker, who's a preseason all Big 12 player, a guy who led the Pac-12 in tackles. But then, there were some issues there, right? We saw, replacing Jordan Morgan is a pretty tall task, and Arizona's still trying to figure that out. Heck, they moved right tackle Jonas Avianaya over after Rhino Tapatotai got hurt. And even Rhino had some growing pains in his first year at left tackle. So offensive line has not been as good as we all thought, right? Losing Raymond Polito was also a big loss too. And, trying to figure out the defensive line after 9 scholarship guys all leave, whether it's graduating or entering the portal. But you still liked where things were at. And then injuries happen on the defensive side of the ball. Offense, for some reason, they can't marry the concepts together and have this like potpourri of concepts that works. And we've seen this in years past, right? We've seen it under Kevin Sumlin with Noel Mazzoni. This new staff comes in, they have this electric, dynamic player. They have this way that they want to do it, and then it just does not work. And you're kind of seeing that to some effect. I think people who are comparing this to the Kevin Sumlin era, like, I think they're crazy for the most part because Brent Brennan actually cares. Like, I'm going to go ahead and say Kevin Sumlin did not care about being the head coach of the Arizona Wildcats. Brent Brennan cares. He wants to be here. This is his dream job. But the offensive play calling just isn't working with the personnel. And when you couple that with the injuries on the other side of the ball, it's just a very unfortunate year for Arizona, a year that had expectations. And it's not just the local media that put on these expectations. Arizona came into the season ranked for the first time since 2015. It was what they were able to accomplish last year, the returning players they had this year. It was expected to be a magical season for Arizona, or at least a year where Arizona is winning a bunch of games and they look exciting, and it has not been that. And also, I think, too, Lev, Big 12 is better than we all thought. Like from top to bottom, like these teams that we thought were going to be kind of towards the bottom, ASU and BYU, look at them. They're now on the top half. So I think there's a number of things that we can look at. But yeah, it's been a very disappointing season nonetheless.
Yeah, Colorado, I think, is better than a lot of people thought. They're ranked. John Wilner's point, by the way, is regarding, Alabama and Washington and Arizona is all of that stuff happened and everyone is mad. No one's happy. People
Yeah.
in Alabama are not happy with Kalen DeBoer. People in Washington are not happy. The fans, I should say. Fans in Washington are not happy with Jed Fish. Arizona fans are not happy with Brent Brennan. You think maybe 1 or 2 out of the 3 fan bases would be like okay with the way things ended up. Alabama's probably in the best shape, but they're not used to having 2 losses at this point in the season. Okay. I got one more from Diego Carrillo III. How do you think the recruits for next year feel about our record and how it seems hard to click on offense and the injuries adding up? I would say there's probably a lot of skepticism among the recruits. I haven't spoken to any of them, but I can only imagine what they're thinking if they're watching this unfold. Sometimes kids are like, well, hey, I can go in there and do better. Or maybe, hey, I can play right away. I'm better than these guys that I'm seeing, but I don't think schematically that there's anything to get super excited about at the moment, which is why I think we all believe that there's going to be some sort of a significant change in the offensive staffing in the offseason, including bringing in somebody to just run the offense, a new offense, whatever that looks like. And your hope, if you're Brent Brennan for Arizona, that person can generate some excitement, some buzz, can ease the concerns that the recruits undoubtedly have.
Yeah, and I think that these recruits are also looking, like you said, hey, I can maybe get some early playing time. If some of these guys are going to be gone next year, because Arizona, they're going to have to replace T Mac, they're going to have to replace several guys, and I'm sure a lot of players are also going to hit the portal too. So I'm sure they look at it like, hey, I could get early playing time, but then if you're a recruit and you're watching the team you're going to play for play on TV, and you hear the broadcasters question the play calling every single week, you're probably looking at like, oh man, maybe I can go elsewhere. And I'm also noticing that some of these highly touted recruits that Arizona's going after, they're taking visits to some of these other schools, right? So it's not confirmed that they're going there until they sign the dotted line. And Arizona has its work cut out for them, and making sure that some of these star players that they have committed remain committed, and that way they can get them on campus.
It's always tenuous until they're actually here, you
Yep.
know? Okay, Steven, it's Stevan at Steve44L. Do we think the changes made to the team's conditioning and strength regimen has benefited us as a whole, or the opposite? We're halfway through conference play, and a good chunk of quality starters players are down with substantial injury. He also wonders, has there been any update on Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt? I don't think Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's going to play again for Arizona. I don't know exactly why things got so screwed up in that regard, but as far as my understanding of things, like, he is viewed as a player who doesn't have any eligibility, or would be an ineligible player if they played him, and there are consequences if you do that. So I don't think that's going to happen. The strength and conditioning issue has come up a lot. Even Brent Brennan raised it himself. I don't really know the answer to that. I don't know what they're doing that's different. Most strength and conditioning programs these days, they all kind of use a similar template. Obviously, some staffs are more elite than others. There was a lot of praise for Tyler Owens, who was the strength and conditioning coach under Jed Fish, came over from Alabama, followed him to Washington. Seemed like they really did a great job in that regard. They had quarterback injuries a couple years ago, but for the most part in 2022 and 23, pretty clean on the injury front. Like, wasn't like the devastation that we've seen this year on the defense, offensive line, etc. But some of it just might be bad luck too. I mean, guys tear their ACLs. It's a violent sport. There are collisions. There are, situations where your body gets twisted awkwardly. Leif Magnuson, his situation is we're dealing with concussions. I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with how they're training them. So I don't know.
Or
That one,
Jacob
yeah,
Manu kicking a football,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Tried to kick the ball in celebration and hurt his leg. People might say, well, if he was in better condition, if he was stronger, that wouldn't have happened. I don't know the answer, and that I will be very interested to see if Brent Brennan sees that as a problem and makes a change there as well. I think there's probably like a 75% chance that he's going to make a significant change on the offensive coordinator front. Uh, 50-50 or less that he changes out strength and conditioning coaches, because I don't know, that one's kind of weird to me. I don't
Yeah.
have a great read on it.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of great things about Colin Carroll, the strength and conditioning coach. He was previously, before his time at San Jose State, he was with Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. And I've heard from the college football circle that Colin Carroll is respected by a lot of people. So I don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Okay, I've got our guy Cat Backer sent in 4 questions. Justin. He's pretty much producing the show for us. These are some interesting ones. Did Umberto Lopez get burned on his return on investment? And will that make more major boosters sour on contributing? What do you think about that one?
Is he talking about return on investment into
An
Noah Fafita
NIL. Yeah, an
and
NIL,
T-Mac?
basically. Yeah.
No, because if Umberto Lopez didn't pony up money to potentially give to these guys and also the Arizona football program, then we're talking about Arizona just in complete rebuild. You don't have Noah Fafita. You don't have Tetairoa McMillan. You don't have a lot of these players, right? So those guys came back and gave Arizona a lot of hope. They gave Arizona fans a lot of optimism for this upcoming season, which you don't really get that often, right? Down here in Tucson when following Arizona football. So did he get burned? I mean, that's such a tough question because obviously you want Arizona to be much better than where they are right now. But if Umberto didn't put up the money, guys like Noah Fafita and T Mac are not staying, and they could be looking elsewhere. And so, no, I don't think that's going to deter other boosters from stepping in and making sure that the athletes who are bringing them wins are not making sure that they're taken care of. So
I'm not going to claim to be like best friends with Umberto Lopez, but we did spend a little bit of time with him around that period, sitting down with him at his office, just talking about stuff. And I got the impression that he really valued loyalty in a big way, and that it was very meaningful to him if those guys decided to stay. And he was hurt when Jed Fish left because he felt that was kind of an act of disloyalty. And he kind of lashed out. He regretted lashing out soon after. But hey, I don't think he's going to fault like the effort of the players because they're trying. They really are. Like if anything, similar to the rest of the fan base, I would think the boosters would blame this more on the coaching staff or just not getting the most out of those players. Okay. Next one from Kat Becker. Would there be any fan interest in a bowl game with a 5-7 record if the NCAA doesn't have enough teams to fill out their bowl roster? I have
no,
no idea whether that is going to be the case. I'm guessing not because of the imbalanced schedules. There's probably going to be enough teams to fill out the bowl roster. I don't think there'd be a huge appetite for it. I would turn it down, honestly. If I were Arizona, I know there's value in getting those extra bowl practices, but Tetairoa McMillan's not going to play in that game.
Jonas Avenaz is not going to
Jonas
play.
Sava and Aya probably not going to play in that game. Takario Davis might not play in that game. It's not worth it. I think it's different if you're 6-6 and you have earned bowl eligibility versus just being given bowl eligibility because there's nobody else. That's a different feeling to me. Like if they won the last game of the season against ASU to get to 6-6, that would be a nice accomplishment. This would just be a consolation prize.
But to be honest with you, Lev, I think at this point of the season with the guys that they have that are projected first round picks, I am willing to bet a large amount of money that that game against ASU will be the last time you see
Yeah,
T Mac in an Arizona uniform and Big
it's fine.
Jonah and Chikaro because these guys have first round status on them right now. Do you really want to get hurt playing in the Taco Bell Gordita Bowl? Right. I mean, that's not an actual bowl game, but you know what I mean? They could go to Shreveport, Louisiana and play in is it the Radiance? Is it the Independence Bowl or something like that?
Independence
Whatever.
Bowl's in
Yeah.
Shreveport, yeah.
Yeah. The
I don't
bowl
know who
game
the
is in
sponsor
Shreveport.
is. Yeah.
So they're not going to be playing in those games. I think at this point right now, you have to base your season on the ASU game. I think that ASU game will define Arizona's season.
Could define Brennan's tenure here, too.
Yeah.
All right, next one from Kat Backer. If Brennan was a more dynamic personality, would there be more optimism for the football program? This is an interesting question because I've heard I've seen it at least on message boards and on social media, a lot of criticism of just the way that Brent Brennan kind of carries himself. He's the way he answers questions. A lot of the way he conducts himself on the sideline. I think a lot of that is just you're going to not like what's happening with the way the coach is if the team is losing. Like, he probably would be exactly the same if they were winning, and that's just his personality. Like, he's from California. He's a laid back guy. He's not a yeller and screamer. He's not going to come into the press conference and pound on the table and throw a water bottle or whatever. Like, he's not like that. So I understand, why people are upset with him, but I think it really has more to do with the results than anything else. And if they were winning, people wouldn't even really notice or care about what he was wearing during a game or his demeanor during press conferences.
When Kevin Sumlin was first hired, Lev, a lot of Arizona football fans were like, man, this guy is so cool. Like, he is cooler than the other side of the pillow. This is much different than what Arizona had with their previous two guys, with Rich Rodriguez and Mike Stoops. A lot of Arizona fans did not really like the fiery personalities that were Stoops and Rich Rod. They said it was a little off-putting. And then Kevin Sumlin comes in. They're like, man, this guy's super cool. And then they start losing games. And what did they start saying? He doesn't care. Kevin Sumlin does not care. He is just totally checked out. I'm getting tired of listening to this guy. I think at the end of the day, results always matter. And like you said, Lev, if Brent Brennan, if Arizona was winning a bunch of football games, the lei that he wears around his neck would not even be a topic of conversation. But so many people use that as a way to lash out at him because they're not winning football games. So,
yeah, I mean, look, I think part of his problem too is that his predecessor was very good in press conference settings. Like, he, remember, Jed Fish, like, kind of been preparing to be a head coach his whole life, right? It was like this lifelong achievement to become a head coach. And he had been literally prepping, like, taking notes, and like had a whole plan for everything, including like how he would conduct himself, how he would try to market the program. And Brent Brennan, that was a high bar to try to clear. And he's approached it a different way. I've been critical of some elements of it. Like, I feel like he should have promoted the program a lot more in the lead up to the season. I feel like they should have had some sort of fan event, autograph signing, something. And you can't leave it up to marketing people. The marketing staff was undergoing a lot of changes. Like, you got to take that on yourself. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's an area where he fell short and did not get good advice from the people around him. But as far as just his sort of day-to-day personality, like, he's a laid-back guy. He's more like, okay, Bill Belichick. How was his demeanor in press conferences or in general before he became a media star himself? Like,
very stoic.
He seemed like he did not want to be there, right? That was basically it. But nobody really cared who was a Patriots fan because they won all the time, right? So winning trumps everything. All right. Last one from Catbacker. Are the Wildcats in a catch-22 situation where in order to improve the game day product and the football team, they need money, but they don't have it? Yes.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
That is well put.
Yeah.
There are a lot of challenges on that front. I mean, the stadium itself needs a significant makeover, and I don't think that they have $500 million lying around. I'm pretty sure that that's not the case. So, how do you improve try to improve like getting in and out, try to improve, maybe improve some of the elements around the actual in-game experience. I know for a fact that Desiree Reed-Francois is aware of the issues with the sound system that a lot of people have complained about. That somehow it's tied to the video board, and if you're in the building, it just it's too loud, too much bass, like doesn't sound good. I think a problem that they need to attack and somehow figure out is how do we get the people who are tailgating on the mall and having a great time to actually come in to the stadium? Because I've heard that in a lot of cases they're just not. They're staying out there where, I don't know, they've got their TVs and they've got their setup and they've got their good food and their drinks, And like, why bother coming in? The attendance that was announced for this last game was over 49,000. It never looked or felt that way to
That's a lie.
me. And by the third quarter, it was maybe half that.
Yeah. No, I think honestly, in Ali and I on Spears and Ali on ESPN Tucson, we talked about this a lot. It doesn't really seem like Arizona football games are an event that you have to go to, right? I remember growing up in Tucson, Arizona, like a lot of people, even when Stoops teams were struggling, it was a cool thing to go to Arizona football games, and they always packed the stadium. And it seems like that really hasn't been the case. And I'm on the road this season in the Big 12, and it's night and day different. Like every single atmosphere that I've been to has been so much better than Arizona. And don't tell me about late kickoffs, because at 8:15 p.m., you know who had a nearly sold out Rice Eccles Stadium, or pretty much was a sellout? It was Utah, and they brought the fans despite the late kickoff. BYU, they obviously, they're passionate about their football. They love the Cougars up there in Provo. Well, they had live music and concerts being played right outside the stadium. Like everywhere around it was this big festive event. And then what was the other game? Oh, Kansas State. The tailgating scene, I mean, it was like a mile and a half all around the stadium. It wasn't just this patch of grass near the campus, like on the U of A mall. So I think tailgating scene needs to get better at Arizona, but I also just think everything around it, the stuff that's happening in the games, like BYU, they have this tradition at the start of the fourth quarter where they have like Cosmo being carried out on like a surfboard, and they have these Polynesian fire dancers out on the field. It's this grand production, and Arizona football has been lacking in that category. And honestly, I don't blame fans, because one, the in-game atmosphere, the showmanship, it sucks. And number two, the product on the field, it's not good, right? Arizona's 3-5 right now. So I think that's what's ultimately leading to poor attendance numbers.
Yeah, like I said, if it's tough when you're struggling and you're also struggling on offense because the product isn't as aesthetically pleasing. They're not as fun to watch. All right, I got two more here. Wilson staff Stan asks, has anyone actually asked Brennan why he did not just copy the offensive playbook from last year? I know it has been asked amongst fans, but I do not recall a direct question to Brennan by the media on this very topic. We have not asked that. But I think the answer is that every coaching staff that comes in wants to bring in their own playbook. You know, unless you've promoted someone from the previous staff to be that, like if Brennan Carroll had been promoted to be head coach, it might have been a very similar looking playbook. But when coaches come in, they've all got egos. They've all got their kind of way of doing things. And in retrospect, probably not the smartest move to have done that. They talked about borrowing some of the verbiage, but I don't know if they actually copied any of the plays. It sure doesn't look like it because the offense doesn't look similar at all to what they were running last year. I think it would have been a prudent move to have at least taken some of the concepts, some of the plays from the previous playbook that worked and incorporated them into what you're trying to do.
When I think Brent Brennan compared it to menus at a bar versus menus at Chili's, right? Like you want to be able to, like, if you're going to take stuff from something, you want it to just have it on one card and keep it easy, rather than just bringing in a bunch of concepts that make it challenging. And so rather than bogging them down with too much stuff from the previous staff and then adding their own stuff, they were like, okay, we're going to take a few things, do what works, and then we're going to add our own flavor. And I think it's just been a bad recipe.
Yeah, you could say that they had concepts of a plan, Justin, not an actual plan when it came to offense. Anyway, okay, we're gonna close it with a question from Ivan, which I think is a great way to end this podcast. What are reasonable expectations for Arizona fans at this point? I think that if we're talking about this season, like this, the goal still is to somehow get to 6-6, and you got to steal one of the two road games, and you got to hold serve at home and get yourself to 5-6 going into the last game. I think someone pointed this out somewhere that Kevin Sumlin's team, that first team, I think was 3-5. And then they won 2 games to get to 5-5. And they were 5-6 going into the last game of the season, and they had a huge lead in that
Oh man.
territorial cup, and then they frittered it away and finished 5-7 and did not go to a bowl game. If they could get into that position again, hey, you take it at this point, right? That would mean winning 2 out of the next 3. You want to give yourself a chance. So I think that's still reasonable to
Yeah.
hope for that.
Well, and also the teams that they're playing against, right? These are teams that Arizona should be able to beat, but we also thought that they should be able to beat West Virginia, and they did not do that. UCF is struggling right now, but UCF is also making some changes. They have their space game coming up. It's in Orlando, so Arizona's got to travel across the country, multiple time zones. That's going to be a tough out for Arizona. And so I look at that game as I think Arizona could win, but I'm not feeling optimistic about it. Houston at home, the Kevin Sumlin Bowl. That's going to be a tough challenge for Houston, because it's going to be how late? 8 o'clock,
8:15.
which is going to be 10 o'clock their time, right?
By
Or
that point, though, no, by that point, it would only be 9:15 because there's only a 1-hour difference between
okay,
us and Central Time at that juncture. So body clock wise, it won't be that bad
yeah,
for Houston. Um, Not that we're going to break down the Houston game, but
but
my biggest concern going into that game is that they have a running quarterback. And
yeah,
remember the biggest issues the defense had early in the season. It was handling the running quarterback. So I'm sure we're going to see a lot of that. And like I said, just getting up for that game, if they lose against UCF,
yeah.
they're 3-6 and going into a bye on a Friday night, late kickoff, unenthusiastic crowd, Yeah.
And
So,
listen,
but I will say, Brent Brennan's team was 1-5 last year at San Jose State, and they won their last 6 regular season games. So it's possible. Maybe the second half of this last game will be a spark. I don't know.
so you're telling me there's a chance.
There's always, yes, I'm telling you, there's a chance. There's always a chance.
But that TCU game, they've had their moments of struggle this year. They have not been perfect.
Here's what
They've
I'll
shown
say. Yeah.
vulnerability. So like all these teams, they look beatable.
You got to score to beat TCU. That game's, when you play TCU, that's going to be a higher scoring game.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't go in there, with an offense that's malfunctioning and hope to have a chance.
But I think the remaining 4 games, they're all winnable for Arizona. And I think
And losable.
and lose yeah. So I think this 4-game stretch is going to be really the stretch that defines the season. And is it going to be Arizona going to a bowl game, maybe even beating ASU, or is it going to be Arizona finishing off their disappointing season and their really one shining moment being a top 10 win over Utah, which doesn't look all that great now considering Utah has been struggling. So Wildcats have their work cut out for them. We'll have a podcast later on in the week before the Arizona UCF game. And we'll have all the coverage and breakdown of that later on. Check out the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Hey, while you're there, give us a rating and a review. Give us a 5-star rating. Leave us a comment. Do whatever you can to help us out on that platform. And also check out all of our work on Arizona football at Tucson.com. Thank you guys for listening and watching.